Welcome to you guys on our screen behind. I'm afraid you're going to have to do that owl thing, swiveling your neck backwards and forwards. We have swivel chairs, we're good. So I would like to welcome everybody who's come for this. Well done you for turning out. Well, we're on day 3 now, but this is going to be the best day so far because we have Katie Whyatt. Hello.
Here.
Oh. Well, okay, so there's 2 Katies. Katie from the Athletic, of course. Now, we'll talk about what you've done in a little while. And Megan, who was here last year and one of my students. And now we have one of our first cohorts of the broadcast journalism course up there, Charlotte. Do you want to give us a wave so everyone can see who you are? Great. I'd like to hear all about what you've done, and everybody else will in a minute. And then Khya, how long have you been since you left us?
I graduated this summer as well as Megan.
Yeah, same cohort, so this could be you next time. And then Katie Smith, it's lovely to have you too. Welcome. Chappers was raving about you a couple of days ago. Mark Chapman was, and we're going to find out why that was in a minute. So hopefully you won't hear too much from me, and I apologise for swivelling and reading notes at the same time, but we've got 3 out of the room and 2 in, so wish us luck. So first up, where shall we start? You see, sometimes I think we should start with the questions because you're all dying to ask them, but I think perhaps we should do a little bit of unpacking. I'm going to surprise you and start with Katie in the orange first. Will you tell us what Mark Chapman said about you was, you are great to work with, and a memorable character. So I would like to know, since everybody in this room needs to know as well, what's your recipe for success?
Ooh, great question. I would say, for me, can you hear me all right? Sorry, I'm struggling to hear a little bit.
Very well indeed.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I would say, for me, working in sport, the smallest but most crucial piece of advice I ever give anyone is just smile. Like, the majority, 99% of sport is really, really fun. You get to go and get paid to watch football, go to the Olympics. I was in America this summer watching live athletics, watching world records be broken. And I think we forget sometimes we can have so much fun with it. I think, especially if you come from a news background, unlike me, I see someone's trying to get in behind me. And I think not enough people smile. Like, it's so much fun. And I know the other Katie will be able to talk so much more about, watching the Lionesses this summer. And what a moment that was. It was, changing history, breaking history, making history. And it's so fun. So I think smile, particularly for me, I work in radio, smile is such a huge part of what you do and what you can hear. And I think just remember that sometimes we don't need to take it too seriously in sport, it's just fun.
Where are you? I can see a TX light in the background.
I'm currently in the 5 Live studios. I've actually got a little microphone next to me, so I was just doing, I was on a breakfast shift this morning, so I do apologise. I've been up since 4 a.m, so I just finished, so you catch me mid-action.
That's lovely, and thank you for joining us. It's so nice, isn't it, to be in on the action there. That's lovely. So you're not the only Radio 5 Live person here, are you? Who else would like to own up to that? Charlotte?
Hiya. Yeah, so I work for BBC World Service Sport and also worked for 5 Live Sport this summer and for BBC Test Match Special. So my speciality is cricket. I'm absolutely enthralled in cricket, which is why I'm actually not there. I'm currently having to keep an eye on the first T20 semi-finals. That's why I'm not there. Yeah.
How exciting! Women's cricket or men's cricket or both?
I do both, but primarily this summer I was doing women's cricket, so I was at the Commonwealth Games in charge of women's cricket for that, and also did the women's test match and women's series against South Africa.
Do you find you have to report differently for women's games to men's games?
So it's different for me because I'm a producer, but in terms of, I think the people that I work with, it is very different. So it's in terms of a lot of people who watch and listen to women's cricket are people who may not be, who's very different to men's because they may not know as much about it. So I think it's different in terms of the way that you report on it and the way that you explain certain situations. But I personally have enjoyed doing women's cricket more than I have doing the men's, just because I think it's a very different environment and atmosphere and one that I really, really relish. And also I have the creativity to do that when I do women's cricket.
What makes it a different environment?
I guess it's the people that you work with. I think people, I guess because they're not as high profile, I don't want to say, but I am going to, in men's sport there are more egos, I would say. So I think it is different when you do women's because there are less egos, and I also find it a lot easier to have conversations with them. Not that I don't with the men's, but I think that is kind of one of the main differences. And it's also, I learn, because last year I did men's and this year I've done women's and men's, you learn there's a different way to speak to certain people and how you navigate that situation. And I think that's just something that you learn on the job, but it's also kind of having the confidence to know that as a woman, you do know what you're talking about. And it's amazing how a lot of women know that, but some men not so much.
It's it's interesting. So as you're with your producer hat on, I just want we had Chappers in on Monday, and he was saying that some of the issues are sometimes with when we include people who are not just male sportsmen, i.e. anybody who might be in a wheelchair or female or any other thing that sadly is still called a diversity, which is a shocker, and hopefully that will end soon. He was saying that you can be overproduced sometimes, and people will say, well, can you talk about, and I'm going to come to you in a minute, Khya, on this one. Can you talk about the amount of crowds we have in the studio, in the stadium? And he'd push back and he'd say, well, no, because for the men's team, I would just talk about the teams that are coming out. Is there an inclination to do that as a producer, to sort of, obviously you've got to give a bit more information at a low profile, but not for long, presumably, before you get on with the game?
Yeah, personally, I think, for me as a producer, I always try not to overproduce. So for me, a lot of the people that you work with know exactly what they're doing, because that's the whole point, that they're doing the job that they're doing. And also, when it's live sport happening, there's nothing I can do to tell them what to do. I just, let everybody get on with it. But for me, it's kind of, the build-up and what happens afterwards that I have the most control in. And with that, I think it's just giving them key points of what to talk about, and basically just pointing them in the right direction of where to go. But for me, I think the most important role of a producer, whether it be TV or radio, and this is something that I learned when I was at Leeds Trinity Unit, was about the relationship that you have with your presenters and with your reporters. And for me, every single producer is different, and also every single reporter is different. So the way that you speak to them has to be different. And to me, it's just kind of building up that trust and that relationship with whoever it would be. So with Mark Chapman with Chappers, I have produced him once, just a little bit, and I know with him, he doesn't like that much production, whereas there are other presenters who like everything scripted, who like everything in the ears, and some don't, and it's just getting that balance. And I think whether you are doing men's sport, women's sport, whether it's able-bodied, whether it's anything, I think you have to treat every single sport in exactly the same way. It's just how you speak to your different presenters and reporters, I think, is different.
Thank you, that's really interesting. I think we'd agree with that, wouldn't we? So, unfortunately, for those who are from minorities, which people were saying women's sport was for a while, you have to do extraordinarily well to be treated equally. Now, at Wembley this summer, after 56 years, I think there was a quite slightly exciting match that you went to, Khya, wasn't there? Will you just tell us? I know so you're at TalkSport now. You're one of my students, our students, and you are at TalkSport now and you do Huddersfield Town, don't you? But why were you at Wembley and what happened?
So me and Megan, who was obviously sat in the studio towards the end of last year, we got an internship at TalkSport, and it was for the women's Euros. So like TalkSport pledged that they'd give 2 women internships for the Euros. Me and Megan, we were well lucky that we got chosen and asked to be involved in that internship. So yeah, we went to lots of the Euros games, and I was at Wembley for the final, working in the box park before the game, speaking to fans, and then we got to go inside and watch the game, and it don't get much better than watching the Lionesses win the Euros. I graduated from uni, and then a week later I was working at Wembley, inside Wembley, watching the Lionesses lift the trophy after it had been so long since England had won a major trophy. It was quite surreal.
It's great, isn't it? So there is life outside uni when you leave here, but beware, it might only be 1 week before you end up where you can't believe you'll be. So that's really good news. So perhaps we better go on to Megan. I will come to you in a minute, Katie. So tell us what's happened to you since you left. First of all, I want to say that she was the only female in my class of boys, and that was an unfortunate discrepancy ratio-wise, and we want to improve that because we need to improve it in the university, but also out in the field. So now you're out there. Tell us a bit about that.
So when I was at university, I was adamant to all the lecturers that I would never, ever, ever go into football.
No.
I said it just wasn't my thing. I didn't want to do it because I was so worried about like the backlash that would come with a woman being in football, because I'd seen so many like vile comments online, and it was just something that I never wanted to do. So I found a niche and I went down the netball route for a while. And I was working for like the Yorkshire Post and Yorkshire Evening Post, writing articles for them on a weekly basis. And I was like, right, that's what I'm going to do. Netball's like the path that I'm going to go down. And then with some serious convincing by Paul, he was like, I think you should really take this like TalkSport internship. And I was like, oh, well, yeah, but it's football, I'm not too sure. And then I did my final year research project on like females in sports journalism and like the consumer impact and how media outlets like represent women, to see why the industry is still sexist. And that just opened my eyes a little bit. I spoke to a few people, including Charlotte, just to get a little bit more insight into women in sport. And it just speaking to everyone, it just made me realise that, you know, we as women should be breaking these boundaries, and we should be the ones being like, oh, I don't care what people are going to say, I'm just going to go do it. So yeah, I ended up doing the internship while still being at uni. And now they've offered me a full-time position. I work in social media for them, and I absolutely love my job. I love football, which is something I never thought I'd say.
Never thought I'd hear that.
No, and yeah, I'm just really excited because obviously the World Cup's coming up, and I'm going to be busy, but I'm very happy.
Mm. And where was the sexism? Because this was a question in her dissertation. Was it with the media outlets, or was it with the consumers, as you call them? Because one of the people we had on Monday was saying that you answered the question yourself.
Well, I would say from the like research that I did, there was obviously still a really clear divide, like in media outlets. Like you even walk into several places now. I know we said like BBC and like TalkSport. There is still a divide. You can see that there's a divide. It's definitely improving. Like they are trying to get more women in. Like obviously, like trying to get Khya and I in for this internship was absolutely amazing. But there is that divide. But they are doing what they can to change that. So I found that it wasn't really so much with media outlets that the issue was, because you can see that they're actively changing that. But it was more with consumers, and it's just like fans with really naive mentalities of like women in sport, and how, you know, it's not the norm for women to be reporting on sport. And, you know, it's just nice to see that there are so many women out there that are trying to change that and are actively changing that. Yeah, like all of us here are literally doing that, so yeah.
Thank you, that's really, really interesting. And part of that is, we were discussing in our class this week, weren't we, in off the field of sport, well, of which there are no women in that class this year, that they think women can't run as fast, that they shouldn't be paid as much. Things like that, there's perceptions that still need changing in various places. But coming on to you, Katie, you've got your book coming out tomorrow, haven't you? Your Beth Mead's book. And I know that you're passionate about giving women the three-dimensional more depth to the story so that we know more about them. Because if you just compare statistics, it's a very shallow pool, and it's very difficult to compare the men and the women and give them parity. So will you tell us a bit about why you've done the book and what you've learned? And it's very exciting that you've done it. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, it came about, obviously Beth was part of the England team that won the Euros in the summer, and then her agent and a literary agent got in contact with me a few weeks ago to say, oh, Beth's got a book deal, and a number of publishers are interested in doing her autobiography, and do you want to be the ghostwriter for it? So it was a very condensed process. We only had 3 weeks to do it because they wanted to get it out in time for Christmas, and she was away with England camps and away training with Arsenal and playing in the Champions League and everything. So it was a process of doing Zoom calls and video calls with her most days for a couple of hours and asking about various aspects of her career. And we were very fortunate in that she sort of instinctively understood. She was very clear, one, in what she wanted the book to be like and had a very clear vision for it. But she was very clear with what writers call show, don't tell. So when you are writing something, rather than saying, oh, Serena Wiegman is the best manager I've ever worked under, you say, oh, Serena Wiegman is the best manager I've ever worked under because she did this or she did that, and being very clear in the reasons behind it and the stories, and being able to add a little bit more depth to it, which is exactly what you want from, I think, any interview, is that colour and that flavour. And so it was a case of obviously spending time with her, going up to her house to see her family and her friends and where she grew up, and her childhood bedroom and childhood photos and everything. And then just it was a very quick turnaround in terms of just such a short window to write it. So it was a relief when we sort of finished it. But then Ian Wright wrote the foreword, which he actually did himself. He sort of sent us a Word document over that he'd written himself, which is quite unusual, I think, for a sports person to write their own column, for example. And then Jermaine Defoe did the afterword, where again I spoke to him on the phone and then typed it up, and he signed it off and everything. So yeah, that was the process for that.
How interesting. And how did you get involved in it? How was it come up with you?
Well, it's sort of, I guess it was maybe a culmination of my journey into the industry. So when I was at school, I started a blog about Bradford City, because I'm a big Bradford City fan. And the biggest advice I would give to anybody is to start a blog, so that you've got, or a podcast or a YouTube channel or whatever medium you want to go into, would be the biggest bit of advice I would give. And especially if it's around something that's quite niche or quite local, or like women's football is still building, and it's easier to get known within that sector or to get access to the key people within that sector. So I started doing Bradford City related stuff and interviewing the players and getting to know the local media around that, which then came up with various opportunities with Radio Leeds and BBC Sport, then moved into women's sport, which then led directly into my job. I started at the Telegraph doing women's football, and then moved to the Athletic doing women's football. So all of that came from the experience that I had of getting to know people, even before I was kind of in a paid role, of doing blogs and YouTube channel and saying, oh, can I interview this person? And when they're far more accessible for local teams or things that are considered new or up and coming and niche, it's far easier to get those interviews and those time with people. So that would be the biggest bit of advice I'd give to build a portfolio, even before you're kind of knocking on the doors of companies like the BBC or the Telegraph or whatever it is.
So from blog, NB, that's why your assignments are that so often, to book, how many years was that?
Exactly 10, I think, yeah.
30 for me. We'll go into that. So, telling in-depth stories is one of the ways that women's sports personalities can be given parity, because as you know, even in rugby now, there's backstories, aren't there? Rugby players are allowed to cry now, aren't they? The backstories you get before a game in the media is part of what builds the picture. Now, I know that Katie Smith, you are an Olympics lover, are you not?
Of course.
Are you on the train now?
No, I'm so sorry about all my antics. I got kicked out of the studio and now sitting in a little, I've got quite a nice view actually now, I don't know if you can see. So I just sort of stranded myself somewhere. And
this is absolute dedication.
So, you know, we're moving on up in the world.
Absolute dedication, thank you so much. I too am an Olympics fan, but backstories and getting the in-depth stories are so important. And I know that you've done a documentary, a brilliant one on the Norwegian Olympic teams, haven't you? So I was just thinking, yeah, tell us a bit about that. And then I'd like to ask you about Ege Hederberg's story. I guess you know a fair bit about her too.
Yeah, so the Norway documentary, so I work a lot for BBC World Service Radio. Sorry, I didn't really get a chance to introduce myself properly. So I do a lot of radio, and I think for me, radio is such a brilliant medium, as you say, to have that ability to tell stories, to go in depth, to be really, really creative, because you're not reliant on pictures in any way. So I pitched this idea. It was off the back of being in Tokyo for the Olympics, and I just suddenly thought, gosh, Norway are winning all these gold medals, and they have always been famous for, of course, being so good in the Winter Olympics, but suddenly here they are smashing it at the Summer Games. And I think World Service, again, gives you that opportunity to go and be a bit creative. So they said, yeah, off you go to Oslo, go and make a documentary. So I picked out a few stories, and one of them was a woman called Birgit Skarstein, who was born able-bodied. She had an accident. She dived into some water when she was on a gap year and hurt her foot, and then from that got this, it's not very nice, but a flesh-eating bacteria. She was in hospital for a year, and she was about to make a full recovery, had one epidural to go, and it went wrong, and she was paralysed from the waist down. And she is honestly, you know, without wanting to sound patronising in any sort of way, one of the most incredible people and one of the most incredible stories I've ever heard, because she said, from that day on, my life ended in one way, and I started again. I learned how to use a wheelchair, and she's now an Olympic champion in the PR1 rowing category. She also competes in the Winter Games. She became the first wheelchair user to compete on Norway's version of Strictly Come Dancing. And I think the opportunity to go out and speak to someone like that, who was able to speak about not only just being a woman, and I suppose the challenges, the barriers that she's faced, but as a wheelchair user, and how she sees life so completely differently. And I think, to me, she was the absolute star of that documentary, and was able to talk about, even in a country like Norway, which I think perceives itself as very forward-thinking and liberal, and has a great sort of similar healthcare system like we do here in the UK, that there's still a real lack of understanding of those who use wheelchairs or those who have a disability. And she was just absolutely amazing, and I think that ability to sit with her for an hour. She's a self-confessed chatterbox as well, so she, you know, quite literally didn't shut up. My recording device actually ran out of battery. We talked for so long. But I think it's those moments where, as you say, you get this completely different side of things. I've been covering the Rugby League World Cup the last few weeks. It's the same with the women competing in that. They're all amateurs. It's the first time they've ever been paid to compete in their sport. And I think those stories really bring it to life, and also in some ways show us that we still have this journey to go on, and we still have more to learn, to understand, to be able to dig into.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that Norway is forward thinking, and they have very, very highly successful teams, don't they? Is there a way they treat women or the way they report them? Is that, can we learn anything from the way the Norwegians do it, to bring women into the same space that men are in?
I suppose, I think it's less about gender, and it's more about how they treat high performance sport. And I think that what I concluded was that they see Olympic sports so highly valued in that country, and the rise of summer sports, you know, the likes of Erling Haaland now, Casper Ruud, tennis, that they pool all their resources. And I suppose that's where the sort of gender element comes in, or being women, is that they don't differentiate whether you are from table tennis or from rowing or from football. Whether you're a man, you're a woman, or a wheelchair user, you all get the same amount of funding. All the resources are pulled together in this specific Olympic centre. They call it the Olympia Top, and it's a really cool place, actually. And I think in that sense, you can absolutely learn, because you can see in the UK, can't you? You grow very easily the amount of funding that goes amongst different sports, and therefore the level of success we get. And this kind of gold at all costs has been a huge talking point in not just, you know, women's sport or Olympic sports, but sports in general in the UK. How do you bring those levels up so that they're equal?
That's really interesting, isn't it? Thank you. There's such good conversations to have. So Charlotte, let's hear a little bit more from you. What do you want the world to know about next in relation to what you have power over?
Sorry, can you just say that again? Sorry, I just missed the last bit.
I was told to ask you a short, simple question, then I forgot. In your position that you have now, what do you think is the most pressing sort of things that need to change to bring parity and more celebration of the really good side of sport, whoever's performing in it?
So for me, I think it's kind of similar to what Katie said in terms of treating everybody equally. But for me, one thing that I'm really passionate about is, in terms of for me for radio and for TV, I think in terms of for parity for women, there are a lot of people that you see and you hear on the radio and on the TV, and it's 50-50, you know, lots of men and women, which is fantastic. But for me, off camera and behind the mic as producers, I really think there's a really big gap. For me personally, doing cricket, I'm the only kind of female producer who does that. And okay, yes, there aren't that many, so I understand that that is obviously a factor. But for me, it's, you know, when you walk into press boxes and when you walk into rooms, and there's a lot of people on the screen that you see, you think this is amazing, and you speak to people and you realise actually no. And for me as a producer, a lot of the times, a lot of the editorial decisions are down to you. So for me, it's really important to have more women making those decisions, because for me, I naturally, without even kind of thinking about it, look at, you know, women's stories and look at women's sport differently to how men would. So for me, I think one of the main things that what we need to do going forward is get more women as producers in radio and TV, you know, camera people, sound, and it might not be as glamorous, and people may not think that, but the things that I've done as a producer, you know, I've been to Wimbledon as a producer, you know, I've been to the cricket all this year, I've been to the Commonwealth Games, I've been to Wembley for FA Cup finals, I've been to a lot of sporting events, and okay, it may not be me in front of the mic or in front of the camera, but also that makes it a lot better, because what a lot of people on camera and on the radio don't tell you is actually when they're doing their job, when the sport is on, as a producer, you sit back, you can sit and you can enjoy the sport, and you can think about things, but you can enjoy it. Whereas poor Katie Smith, when she's at the rugby, she has to concentrate the whole time. When I'm there as a producer, I can have a great time. So one thing that I want to say is, like, yeah, go on, Katie, you could jump in.
Well, I was going to say, I didn't even get a pie this weekend, because the Prince of Wales was there. They blocked off access to the press room, and it was just devastating.
So guys, you should go into producing, because we get pies all the time.
I think some of them might have figured that out themselves. Excellent, that's lovely. All right, are you two going to Qatar?
No, neither of us are going. We've both been, so I don't know if a few of you know, me and Katie know each other quite well. We do work together and are really close friends. And but we have both been to, you know, amazing things this summer. But you know, who knows? The next World Cup we might be in, and who knows? We'll wait and see.
Brilliant.
I think the Women's World Cup will be so much better next year, to be totally honest. Australia, New Zealand, and the momentum of this year, I mean, it's just going to be so phenomenal. I think you've seen the change. One thing I was just going to add to what Charlotte was saying in terms of the balance of women coming through and how they're talking about them. I do a lot of sports news bulletins, and about 3 years ago when I started, it was quite rare for us to get a women's sports story in there, and it was quite often we have to go, right, what sports line are we going to add for the women? And now, the Lionesses, the women's cricketers, the rugby league, they're leading the bulletins, and I just think in 3 weeks, you know, we've got England in a World Cup final on Saturday, the Rugby Union World Cup. I think that is just, what amazing progress, that people also want to consume it as well. It's not just tokenism.
Yeah, it's wonderful, isn't it? Really wonderful. So just coming back into here, Katie Whyatt. Now, you're at the Athletic. Now, we do business models in our part of the sports programme. The American Athletic's very different from the UK one. What are the opportunities for people like you to become producers or take executive decisions above perhaps just the journalist pay grade in Athletic? Do you know, and have you got plans?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I mean, it's very diverse in terms of we can go on podcasts, and they've got partnerships with TiVo so that we can do the kind of YouTube tactical stuff, but I'm not too sure of the pay grade and things. It just feels like everyone's always in dialogue, and it's got quite a diverse work team as well, and we've got kind of Asian writers and black writers when there are a lot of national news outlets on the written side that still don't have that. So I think just having a very diverse newsroom makes us more aware, as Charlotte was saying, that when you need female producers sometimes to be more aware of certain agendas, I think that we just automatically have that because of some of the conversations that we have, because some of the people that are in the newsroom.
Interesting. So Khya and Megan, I expect you probably, well, I think you've asked questions at Journalism and Media Week yourselves, haven't you, in the past?
Yeah.
Are you ready? Because I think it's time to switch over to, is it question time? Yeah. I'm sure you've got questions. I'm delighted how the mix of genders in this room is not in our favour, which is even better. Yes, Alex.
Oh, John, Alex. John.
Hi, I wanted to ask the Katie and Megan in the room. I suffer from a lot of self-doubt sometimes. How would you suggest I get over that?
I think personally the more you do, the less it goes. So I can remember doing the more it goes, sorry. I can remember doing my first ever match report I did some freelance work for kind of like The Independent and The Guardian and stuff around the time of graduating and last year of uni and stuff, and I can remember turning up very, very early for Sheffield United to do this match report on the championship game, and kind of not knowing what I was doing and being very anxious and ringing my mum and saying I'm not sure what I was doing. And then the more that you do it, the more it becomes instinctive and second nature, and you worry less about things. And I think the more that you do, say you will remember your first ever interview, or you'll remember your first ever podcast, and the more that you do it, the easier it gets. And I think the more things that you do, the more you can walk into a room and go, oh, well, I've done this, and this, I deserve to be here, or I've done this thing that these other people can't do, so I deserve to be in this room. And I think the more that you can just tell yourself that you deserve to be in a room and you deserve to take up space, regardless of whatever that voice is telling you that you don't deserve to be there, then I think that's when it becomes a lot easier.
I would 100% agree. I have a lot of self-doubt, even still now. I used to compare myself a lot to the boys on the course, and just all the work that they were doing, and I used to feel like, oh, they know more about this than I do and stuff like that. But sometimes you've just got to go in and be like, you know, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't good enough. This is what I want to do, and you've just got to be confident. I mean, the first thing I said to my manager was, I'm coming for your job, and he loved that. Because, you know, you just got to go in, like, realistically, did I think I was going to come for his job? No, but, you know, you never know, one day you've just got to be confident, because you can do anything. Like, if you told me right now that, you know, I was literally doing my dissertation like 5 months ago, that I'd be working at TalkSport, I would never have believed you. And now, you know, you've just got to push past it, and you can do it. Everyone can do it.
Yeah, you talked earlier about finding a niche within the sport and stuff. I mean, I do a lot of reports on futsal, but one thing I've struggled with is getting newspapers to get involved with it. So how did you convince, say, your Yorkshire Post to put those articles in for you?
Well, they were sort of looking for someone because they wanted to open it up. But the best thing that you can do is just pitch ideas to people, because they love hearing ideas, and just say, you know, if you do your research on it, which you would have done, and you say, you know, I've got this idea, I've got a good audience that I could bring into your company, I'm sure they'd love it and they'd want to try it out. There's no harm in them trying it. And it's just so good to have a niche, because it just makes you stand out from other people. Because, you know, if you're just sitting there focusing on something, like, for example, football, everyone does football, all sports journalists will do it. If you can go out and say, you know, I can do something else, so that's why I went down netball, then places like that just love it. And it's, you know, you can, if you've got a passion for it, push the ideas, because people will absolutely love that.
My question is for Katie from the Athletic. Reece James, the Athletics have released that Reece James will not be going to Qatar, which is a massive myth for England. Is there any more news you can tell us about who will be going for tomorrow's selection? No,
Chelsea fan, you can tell, can't you? Okay, let's just pop back here, hold on.
Hi, I'm doing an essay on women in sports journalism, probably about the challenges. I guess if you were to write that, what do you think would be an interesting angle to go down?
Should we ask everybody that in turn?
Yeah, it's to anyone.
Let's start with Katie Smith, because we've got a clock here. Will you look, top tip for that essay? Can you hear us?
Sorry, could you just repeat what the essay was on? Sorry, I missed that.
Just challenges facing women in sports journalism.
Challenges facing women.
I think I would sort of echo a little bit what we've touched on, that it's those things of feeling like you have to do even more than other people to just be taken seriously. So, I mean, you know, preparation is obviously so important in any part of journalism, particularly sports journalism. But I think sometimes women, or I don't want to speak for everyone, I sometimes feel I have to go above and beyond, and I have to have that extra hour of work or that extra bit of information that no one else knows, because naturally I'm not sort of taken as seriously, or people still seem a little confused that you're into sport as a woman. It's like, oh yeah, that's shocking, isn't it? So I would say that element of still feeling that you have to prove yourself to be taken seriously. And I think it's a battle that I still feel like I go through. You know, I talk on the radio and I think, oh God, did everyone believe me? And actually, yeah, of course they did. You know, you've done your research, you know your stuff, you're making an informed opinion. And the beauty of sport as well is that it's subjective. So, you know, there is right and wrong in some sense, but also there's a little bit of a pinch of salt and a bit of magic in there as well.
That's such a good answer. I wish we had that on record. I put it straight onto Moodle. Charlotte.
I guess for me, I'd think, I wouldn't think of myself as a woman in sport. You know, I wouldn't think of all of us as being women sports journalists. That's not what we are, we're sports journalists. We are, you know, exactly the same as men, if not, I think a bit better, but you know, that's subjective. But for me, I think it's whenever you do anything, you don't go in there thinking, why am I doing this? You know, why am I here as a woman? I think it's get rid of that, and I think that's something that we all have to do. And I think as women we have to do it, but I think men also have to do that. You know, men also need to change the way that they think about women doing sport. So for me, I think one of the main challenges is just not thinking like that, is going along and treating sport as sport, not women's and men's sport, and not women's sports journalists and men's sports journalists. You know, we all did, you know, whichever way we all came through to get our jobs, we all went through that and did that. So we didn't get our jobs because we're women, we got our jobs because we're all bloody good at it.
Brilliant. Quite right. Yes, I mean, yeah, the day women in sport isn't even a phrase that anyone knows anymore would be a wonderful day, wouldn't it? So, Khya, how are you going to help her cheat with her essay that she's asking advice for?
Sorry, just repeat what the essay was on.
Challenges facing women in sports journalism.
When I was at TalkSport, I was doing a little bit slightly different to what Megan was doing. So she was in social, and I was kind of like in the studio, behind the scenes, like working alongside the assistant producer. And a lot of the shows, and in general, it was kind of men. Most of them were men, which in ideal, so hopefully they go away from that eventually. But it's just like, I don't know, because you should just be able to work as hard or do as much as the men who get in their position do, but obviously it's not always possible. So I don't know, if you kind of just, I mean, you don't necessarily need to do more than what you do anyway, because you shouldn't have to do more just being a woman to get in. Like, you should just get in anyway. Like, if that was in an ideal situation, it wouldn't matter if you were a man or a woman, or non-binary, obviously. You could just get in. Yeah, I think it's challenging because, like I say, a lot of stuff in sport is just men, but it's moving slowly, and hopefully it can continue moving quicker and not slowly. And eventually it's just all women, because wouldn't that be amazing?
Brilliant.
Sorry, to the men who own that.
So that paragraph of your chapter, your essay, which you will have to quote her, Gott 2022, is that they shouldn't have to work harder. As Katie Smith was saying, she has to, and still, which is a shame, because your fame precedes you, but both of you who work at the BBC, we love having you there. It's a real honour having you here. So we now need some more help with this essay. Katie?
I mean, this isn't just a women in sports journalism thing, because I don't think that women should be the only ones pushing for coverage of women's sport, but I think that a lot of outlets still see women's sport as something to be covered by women, and I think that a lot of outlets underfund their coverage of women's sport, so there'll be a lot of outlets that maybe have the work experience people do it, or have one person doing the entirety of women's football or women's rugby, so they've got kind of a 12-team league to cover, and they can't be at every single game. They might have to do certain bits voluntary or unpaid or in overtime, and I think that sometimes when things are understaffed, women's sport tends to be the first thing to suffer. And I think that sometimes, not that this is a situation I've had in my career, but I know from certain people at certain other papers and the way that it maybe used to be 5 or 10 years ago in particular, you might be pitching women's sport related ideas, and even more broadly now when we look at women's sport and we talk about coming back after pregnancy or playing while you're on your period or equal pay or all these kind of broader issues on top of the actual on-field coverage that men, if you've got male editors or male staff on the paper that are working with you on those projects, might not always be willing to jump in with it or might not always be willing to get it. So I know that historically that's something that colleagues maybe have suffered from in the past, where they've been pitching ideas to male editors who maybe don't get it. But I've always been very fortunate in that I've been in environments where they have got it and they've been really keen to kind of welcome that newer perspective.
Lovely, thank you. Megan?
I mean, it's sort of similar to like what I was doing my dissertation on. It was just cool to look at different angles of it, like, you know, the fans and media outlets. And also it's kind of good to have a look at like women's mentality towards it, because obviously, like I said, with the whole football thing, I can't blame anyone. Like, yeah, okay, I was made to feel like I couldn't be in football, but then that's also like my own barrier. So it's also just having a look at that side of it as well, I would say.
Lovely. We have another question now.
Hi guys, first of all, thanks for joining us here today. Just want to know from all your perspectives, where did you start with your interest in sports journalism? What is essentially your origin story in this line of work and this lifestyle?
Let's start with Charlotte this time. What was that first step?
So was it where did my love of sport come from? Was that the?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, for me, I guess I was kind of later in life, and lots of people grew up playing sport. For me, playing sport, absolutely not for me. Absolutely not. Watching sport, excellent. That's good for me. And for me, it was I used to just sit on a Friday night with my dad and watch. It was rugby league was what I started watching. It was just something for me to do with my dad, just something that we could do together. And then from that, I then got into kind of more sports. And then we'd go and watch the cricket, which is where I started liking cricket. And then I just thought, how amazing would it be to get paid to actually watch sport? That was my initial thinking. And that was how I then thought, oh, maybe I should look into journalism and that kind of thing. It was just through talking to other people and what they had done. And now I think my passion has just grown from that, and now I'm absolutely obsessed with all sports, mainly cricket. I just cannot get enough of it. But for me, it was just sitting and watching and taking that in and thinking how amazing would that be. And I just now think how incredibly lucky I am now that dream that I had is come true and I get paid to watch sport. I mean, what more could you want?
Quite right. Katie Smith.
Yeah, mine started very young. I remember I was about 4 or 5 when the Sydney Olympics were on in 2000, and my dad woke me up in the middle of the night and we watched Catherine Granger going for gold in the rowing, which she didn't manage to do. She did eventually. And I think if I could offer a piece of advice for those who might be like me, who like football, but it's not, maybe their absolute passion, or they haven't grown up absolutely obsessed with one team and stats and data, and you think that is what makes you a sports fan. It absolutely isn't. It's so much more than that. It's passion. It's about learning. It's about being able to prepare, but also, like we were saying right at the start, like the storytelling aspect of it. And I think that's what really piqued my interest all through my life. And then I actually met Katie, the other Katie, at Leeds University, and we were both volunteering for the Women's Sports Trust, because women's sport, as you can see, has always been like a huge, huge passion. for me, and I think I've therefore sort of built up a portfolio, started in writing, and then moved into radio, because I think both mediums are a hugely beautiful way to tell stories. So I'd also say, you know, never shut yourself down. Multi-platform, it's a buzzword at the BBC at the moment, so make sure you can do everything, and just don't be scared if you're not someone who knows, you know, the 1978 FA Cup winning team. Doesn't matter, you can still work in sport.
So let's hear from the other Katie. Thank you, that's so interesting. Let's hear about you, that first moment.
Yeah, I remember the first time I ever watched football. I remember it very vividly. It was the 2006 FA Cup final. I don't know what ages we've got in the room. People might be too young to remember this, but Steven Gerrard had a really, really good game, and it was kind of one of his best games for Liverpool, and they won on penalties, and that was my first introduction to football, and it was such a dramatic game with a really good individual performance from one of the really iconic figures in football, and going to penalties and understanding sudden death and stoppage time. So that was my first big introduction to it, and then immediately after that there was the 2006 World Cup in Germany the first year, so the same year. So that was my introduction to it. So it was that game that I remember in particular, and then the whole summer of reinforcing that, and then started going to watch Bradford City with a season ticket. And then in 2015
Up
was
the
another...
chickens.
Up the chickens. 2015 was another big shift then, because that was the Women's World Cup in Canada in football, and they got a bronze medal in that game, and that was I'd seen women's football before, and it was always maybe tucked away when I was channel flicking, so I knew of people like Kelly Smith and Eni Aluko and Karen Carney because I'd maybe just caught them on the back of a magazine or channel flicking and tucked away on Eurosport or something like that. But then that was the first time that I'd watched every single game, and with it being in Canada, the time difference, some of the games were on at midnight, and my brother and I had stayed up really late to watch them and everything. So that was the first time that I'd been really engaged with them and been like, wow, there's a place for women's sport on the mainstream, and there's a place for me as a woman in football as well. So that was the first time I think I became less conscious about taking up space in that arena and more aware of the power of women's football and the stories that were to be told in there.
So watching with your dad, or just passions, not gender specific at all, is it? Megan, let's hear yours.
Mine was, so I've always loved sport, I've always played sport. Honestly, any sport under the sun, I have done it. Including hockey, and I was absolutely rubbish at hockey. And that's where my love sort of grew. I always knew that I wanted to do something in sport, and I was actually, before I came to uni, I was really adamant that I was going to do physio. And I ended up doing some, just writing a few bits for just school, homework-wise, in sixth form. And then I ended up doing this PE speaking exam where we had to I had to watch this game of netball and commentate on it and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, I'm actually quite good at this. I can just talk for England. And then I just realised that going into sports journalism was definitely something that I wanted to do. I was obviously, at first I was really nervous. Never thought that I would be very good at it. But I absolutely love it now. And it's amazing how broad it is and how much you can do and how much experience that you can get within it. You don't have to just focus on one thing, do you know what I mean? So obviously Khya was saying that she was in production, but then I got to delve into a bit of production and stuff like that, and then social media and audio, and it's so broad and there's so much to do, and there are plenty of opportunities, and I must admit it is hard to get into, but if you've got that passion and that drive to get into it. And one thing I'll always be really proud of myself for doing was getting just as much work experience as I can, because it's so important to be able to come out of somewhere and be able to be well, I've worked here, I've done this, I've done that, not just be oh, I've got a degree. It helps you out so much in the future, and people will be happy to take you on. They'll snatch you up in a second if you're oh, I've got experience here rather than just my degree.
Would you agree with that, Khya?
Just to go back to the question, when I left college, I literally didn't know what I wanted to do. I just liked watching sport, but I never thought about covering sport or doing anything. After college, I took a year out, and I was like, what the heck am I going to do now? And then it was just I guess in the end, it's quite lucky that I got a place at Leeds Trinity, because I did broadcast journalism as well, not sport, because I literally had no idea what I wanted to do. And then I got a couple of emails one week off Darren, who I can see like at the back, I think. And they were like just opportunities at football clubs, just doing like club media. And I was like, you know what? I'll just send an email to one of them, see what happens. And then yeah, that's when I started to like actually be interested in covering sports. So literally like not even till I was at uni, I kind of got interested in doing it, and yeah, it kind of grew since then. But yeah, so yeah, you don't have to, even if you go to uni and you have no idea what you're gonna do, you can discover a passion and then try and do it. And hopefully in the end it works out well, because I mean, I think at the start of uni 3 years ago, I had no idea what I was going to do, and by the end of uni 3 years later, I was at TalkSport for a bit, which is pretty cool.
Lots of us don't know what they want to do, and we have it's just time for one. There's one on the front as well. Have you got time for two more, or just one?
Oh,
more?
right, yeah, I reckon so.
My question is for Charlotte. So in the beginning, you were talking about the professional relationship between you as a producer and your presenter. How would you build the professional relationship if you've just met them for the first time?
So I think for me, I think one good example is when I first met Jonathan Agnew, who's the cricket correspondent for the BBC, who I think it's fair to say he's quite a scary character. Many people have said this in the past, so I was very nervous to meet him. But for me, I did two things. One was making a cup of tea, because being from Yorkshire, I'm really good at making cups of tea. And two, it was chat to him about me and my passion for sport and how I got into it. And I think the reason why me and him get on so well now is because he knows that I'm good at my job. He knows I know what I'm doing. And for me, I think whenever you meet anybody and when you're going to work with somebody closely, I think all they really want in a producer is they want to be able to trust you. And for me, the way that any presenter or reporter will trust you is if they know that you know what you're doing. And even if you don't think you know what you're doing, fake it till you make it and say, I do. And for me, that is what I did. Just kind of sit down, have a good conversation with whoever it is that you're working with. Tell them why you're doing what you're doing and what you think going forward would work, and kind of build it from there.
Brilliant. So final one, last one.
Oh yeah, it's been really interesting, and I just wondered what your perspective was. We've spoken about a lot of sports today, but why are there no or very few women in Formula One and motorsport in general, do you think?
Money.
Yeah, it is a bit of a roadshow.
I mean, I love Formula One. I wanted to, for a long time, I really wanted to go into Formula One. I don't really know. I just think it's, you know, again, it's one of those perspectives that women wouldn't really be into cars and racing and stuff like that, but it's quite hard. Like, I never knew a route that I could go down to get into it. It's quite a hard way to an industry to go down. But I mean, like Carolyn said, money.
The last female in Formula One was in 1992. Daughter of, as my students found out this week, very wealthy person indeed. So it could be possibly a barrier. That was a sort of straw poll we had in our class this week. So, but things may change, mightn't they? And I think it's been a real eye-opener, hasn't it, to hear all of you today. Katie Smith, thank you so much. Charlotte Smith, you're not related, are you, Smith-wise? Swift, well that's why, because I can't read my own writing. But we do have two Katies. Katie Whyatt, thank you so much, and Megan, and I think we've lost Khya, I think she's gone. So thank you all so, so much. We've really appreciated your time, especially those of you who have cut out of work, from work to do it. In fact, I think you all have. Could we have a big hand, please, for these women in sport?